In 2010, criminology student Stephen Griffiths, known as the Crossbow Cannibal, unleashed terror in Bradford. Obsessed with violence, he targeted vulnerable women, leaving chilling evidence and a city shaken. Captured on CCTV in a brutal act, Griffiths shocked the nation with one of the most disturbing crime stories in recent memory. If you're interested in true crime stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into real-life cases. Let's dive into the story of the Crossbow Cannibal. Stephen Griffiths was born on December 24, 1969 in Dewsbury, West Yorkshire, England. He was the eldest of 3 children raised by his mother after his parents separated when he was young. Described as an intelligent yet introverted child, Griffiths often displayed behaviors that concerned those around him. From an early age, he struggled to form close relationships and spent much of his time alone, frequently reading and immersing himself in books rather than engaging with others. This isolation would become a significant part of his life, especially as he grew older. As he reached adolescence, Griffiths' behavior began to show signs of deeper trouble. He developed an intense fascination with violent crime and serial killers, spending hours studying infamous cases and reading books that detailed the actions and psychology of murderers. Those who knew him described him as quiet and detached, with few friends and a tendency to keep to himself. His growing interest in crime, particularly violent crime, became a defining characteristic of his personality. He often shared thoughts that disturbed others, voicing fascination with control, power, and the methods of infamous killers. By the time he reached his late teens, Griffiths' behavior had taken a darker turn. He was arrested at age 17 for attacking a store clerk with a knife, an incident that foreshadowed the violent path he would later pursue. He was sentenced to a 3-year probation period, and while he faced legal consequences, this incident did little to deter his growing obsession with violence. In fact, this fascination only deepened, and Griffiths seemed to use his criminal record almost as a badge, symbolizing his deviation from society's norms. As an adult, Griffiths pursued higher education, choosing criminology as his field of study. He enrolled in the University of Bradford, where he pursued a PhD in criminology. On the surface, his studies seemed legitimate. Criminology is a field where understanding criminal psychology and the factors that drive individuals to commit violent acts can be crucial. However, Griffiths' reasons for pursuing criminology were far from academic or altruistic. His focus was not on preventing crime or understanding it from a legal or sociological perspective, but on exploring it in a personal and obsessive way. His studies allowed him to delve deeper into the minds and methods of notorious killers, providing a disturbing window into the world of violence that he increasingly idolized. Throughout his time at university, Griffiths maintained a public image that was quiet, if somewhat eccentric. Fellow students and faculty members saw him as intelligent but distant, and he rarely engaged in casual conversations or formed meaningful connections. His private world was dominated by thoughts of violence, with a collection of books, films, and materials dedicated to infamous serial killers. Griffiths studied the lives and actions of individuals like Ted Bundy and the Yorkshire Ripper, even referencing them in academic settings. His fascination with their crimes wasn't analytical. It was personal. He seemed to identify with them, seeing them not as men who inflicted harm, but as figures to emulate and understand on a deep level. Griffiths displayed several troubling behaviors over the years that hinted at possible antisocial tendencies. He was known to be unpredictable, often isolating himself and showing little interest in forming close friendships. He rarely showed empathy or understanding toward others, viewing people more as objects of interest than as individuals. Those who interacted with him often described him as cold and detached, someone who seemed to view social norms and laws with disdain. Over time, he began experimenting with dark ideologies, reinforcing his belief that violence and cruelty were acceptable expressions of power and control. His criminal history continued as an adult, with multiple arrests for minor offenses such as shoplifting, threatening behavior, and animal cruelty. In one instance, he was reported to have killed animals, an act often associated with early signs of psychopathy. These incidents reinforced his growing reputation as a troubled individual, someone who showed a disturbing lack of remorse and a desire to operate outside of society's moral boundaries. Despite these warning signs, Griffiths continued to progress through his studies largely unchecked. His academic pursuits gave him a sense of legitimacy and a cover for his increasingly dark obsessions. For Griffiths, studying criminology was more than an academic endeavor. It was an outlet that allowed him to indulge in and justify his twisted interests. His research topics focused heavily on violent crime, and his academic work seemed to reflect his personal inclinations rather than a scientific curiosity. As Griffiths neared the end of his academic journey, his behavior only grew more extreme. He spoke openly of desiring fame, particularly the kind associated with notoriety. He viewed infamous figures as heroes, aspiring to make a name for himself in the same disturbing way. His mindset was shifting from studying violent acts to plotting his own, further blurring the line between fascination and intent. His academic background in criminology gave him the knowledge he needed to understand both the investigation processes and the psychological manipulation techniques employed by killers. This knowledge emboldened him, feeding his desire to act on his dark impulses while evading detection. Bradford, a city in West Yorkshire, England, was historically known as an industrial hub, particularly during the 19th century. However, like many former industrial centers in the UK, it faced economic decline in the latter half of the 20th century, leaving behind social challenges that significantly impacted its residents. Unemployment rates remained high, and poverty affected a substantial portion of the population. These economic issues led to growing challenges, especially among vulnerable groups within the community. By the time Stephen Griffiths emerged as a violent threat, parts of Bradford were struggling, with areas characterized by social deprivation and limited opportunities, factors that increased the vulnerability of certain residents. Among Bradford's most vulnerable were women involved in the local sex work community. Due to a lack of social services, persistent poverty, and for some, addiction, a number of women found themselves relying on sex work as a means of survival. Many of these women faced difficult circumstances, often feeling trapped in a cycle where limited education, mental health issues, and addiction left few alternatives. For them, Bradford streets provided the only available avenue for supporting themselves and, in some cases, their families. These conditions made them particularly susceptible to dangers, as their routines required them to navigate areas known for crime and violence, often late at night and away from immediate help. Social isolation further complicated their lives. Women in this line of work were often marginalized, stigmatized, and misunderstood, with society frequently overlooking their challenges or failing to extend the same level of care and protection that might be given to others. Resources aimed at assisting sex workers were limited, meaning many of these women lacked access to stable housing, healthcare, and counseling services. This environment of instability left them exposed to a range of threats, from physical violence to exploitation, as they navigated daily risks without sufficient support. These realities made them prime targets for predators like Stephen Griffiths. He recognized this vulnerability, understanding that these women were often disconnected from their families and friends, and in many cases viewed as invisible by society. Griffiths was aware that, given the stigmatized nature of their work, their absences might go unnoticed for longer periods, and investigations into their disappearances could lack urgency. This knowledge played a significant role in his actions. He carefully chose individuals who, he believed, would draw the least attention and whose loss would go unnoticed by the larger community for a time. In addition to the struggles of individual women, the local community's overall difficulties played a role in Griffiths' choice of victims. Bradford's socio-economic conditions made it easier for predators to exploit vulnerable individuals without immediate repercussion. Police resources were often stretched thin, particularly when addressing complex and multifaceted issues like sex work. Law enforcement, constrained by budget and staff limitations, frequently faced challenges in addressing crimes related to marginalized populations. The city's overburdened support systems and economic hardships contributed to an environment where those at risk could be more easily overlooked. Women involved in sex work in Bradford also faced stigma from within the community, adding to the challenges they encountered. Public perception of their profession, influenced by societal stereotypes, often prevented them from accessing adequate support. This stigma meant that violence against these women could sometimes be dismissed or deprioritized, creating an added layer of risk. Griffiths exploited this stigma, knowing that public and institutional biases would likely delay action or investigation, especially if the missing individuals came from the most marginalized backgrounds. In 2009, Stephen Griffiths' descent into violence became fatal. His crimes targeted vulnerable women in Bradford, beginning with Susan Rushworth, a 43-year-old mother and grandmother who had been struggling with addiction. Susan disappeared on June 22, 2009, after leaving her apartment to visit friends. Griffiths chose Susan as his first victim because of her isolated life and limited connections, which he likely believed would minimize the urgency around her disappearance. She was last seen near his apartment complex, a building in Bradford where he often observed potential victims from his window. While her body was never found, investigators later identified her as one of Griffiths' confirmed victims. Evidence linking him to her murder was established through his later confessions and his own statements to police. In April 2010, Griffiths struck again. This time, his victim was 31-year-old Shelley Armitage, another woman in the Bradford sex work community. Shelley, known to her friends and family as kind and trusting, had also faced personal challenges, including homelessness and addiction. She disappeared on April 26, 2010, after being seen in the city center not far from Griffiths' apartment. Griffiths lured Shelley into his residence, where he attacked her. He documented parts of the murder, capturing video footage that he later reviewed and showed off as a form of dark trophy. After killing her, Griffiths attempted to dispose of her body in the River Aire, a tactic he would repeat with his next victim. Unlike with Susan, fragments of Shelley's body were later found in the river by authorities, confirming her as one of Griffiths' victims and revealing the gruesome lengths he went to in an attempt to cover his crimes. Only weeks later, Griffiths would kill a third time. Suzanne Blamires, a 36-year-old woman and the mother of a young daughter, disappeared on May 21, 2010. Like the others, Suzanne struggled with addiction and had few connections who could raise immediate alarm if she went missing. CCTV footage captured her final moments and provided a chilling look into Griffiths' methods. In this footage, Suzanne is seen running down a hallway in Griffiths' apartment complex, attempting to escape. Moments later, Griffiths appears, calmly aiming a crossbow and shooting her. The footage shows the brutal impact of the attack, with Griffiths then dragging her lifeless body back into his apartment. This recording, later recovered by investigators, would play a crucial role in establishing his guilt. Following Suzanne's murder, Griffiths continued his pattern of disposing of the remains in the River Aire. However, this time his actions attracted more attention. Unlike with his previous victims, authorities were able to locate body parts belonging to Suzanne along the riverbank, a discovery that quickly escalated the urgency of the investigation. Pieces of evidence, including her severed head and other remains, were recovered in the days following her death, leading police to Griffiths' building. Griffiths, later known as the Crossbow Cannibal, made claims about the nature of his crimes that would disturb even seasoned investigators. During police questioning, he told authorities that he had consumed parts of his victims, asserting that cannibalism was part of his crime spree. He described these acts in chilling detail, saying he cooked and consumed pieces of flesh. However, despite his graphic descriptions, there was little physical evidence to corroborate these claims. The police, who searched Griffiths' apartment extensively, found nothing conclusive to prove his involvement in cannibalism, leading to questions about whether these statements were fabrications meant to amplify the horror of his actions or a disturbing but unverifiable truth. A search of Griffiths' apartment revealed a collection of items that provided further insight into his violent obsessions and the methods he used to commit his crimes. Police found books and materials about notorious serial killers, indicating a long-standing fascination with murder and cruelty. They also discovered graphic videos and images, some of which depicted acts of violence, further suggesting that Griffiths had an almost idolizing interest in killers and their methods. His apartment walls were lined with disturbing photos and symbols, creating an environment that seemed to embody his dark obsessions. Alongside these unsettling items, investigators found various tools and weapons, including the crossbow used in the attack on Suzanne Blamires. Blood evidence was recovered from multiple locations within the apartment, linking Griffiths to the three victims and supporting his confession of having murdered them. In the bathroom, police discovered traces of cleaning supplies and chemicals, which Griffiths likely used in an attempt to cover up his actions. Forensic evidence confirmed that he had disposed of body parts in the River Aire, where remains from both Shelley Armitage and Suzanne Blamires had been discovered. Investigators also noted the presence of video equipment, suggesting Griffiths may have recorded parts of his crimes. Though no direct footage of the murders themselves was found, police believed he had possibly documented other actions related to his violent behavior, indicating a level of planning and a desire to relive his crimes. This evidence helped to paint a picture of Griffiths as a calculated individual who took pride in his actions and sought to immortalize his crimes in some way. In addition to the disturbing decor and collections, police discovered physical evidence directly tying Griffiths to the murders. His crossbow, used in the attack on Suzanne Blamires, was found among his belongings, along with arrows compatible with the weapon. Forensic testing later confirmed traces of Suzanne's DNA on the crossbow, providing concrete evidence linking Griffiths to the crime captured on CCTV. The apartment floor, walls, and bathroom also contained bloodstains, later identified through forensic analysis as belonging to Shelley Armitage and Suzanne Blamires. These findings confirmed Griffiths' confession and indicated that he had murdered his victims within the confines of his apartment. Further examination of the apartment revealed Griffiths' attempts to dispose of evidence and cover his tracks. In the bathroom, investigators found an assortment of cleaning chemicals and supplies, which Griffiths had likely used in an attempt to clean up blood and other physical traces. Despite these efforts, significant forensic evidence remained, allowing police to piece together the violent events that had taken place. Griffiths' disposal methods became clearer as police continued their search beyond his apartment. With Griffiths in custody and cooperating only minimally, police expanded their search to areas he was known to frequent. They focused on the River Aire, a nearby waterway where they believed Griffiths had attempted to dispose of his victims' remains. This belief was based partly on Griffiths' own admissions, as well as body parts previously discovered in the river following the disappearances of Shelley Armitage and Suzanne Blamires. Divers and forensic teams were deployed along the riverbanks, carefully combing through the area for additional remains or personal effects that could connect Griffiths to the victims. Their search efforts in the River Aire yielded grim results. Police found body parts belonging to both Shelley Armitage and Suzanne Blamires, including Suzanne's severed head. These discoveries provided irrefutable evidence of Griffiths' actions and confirmed his attempts to scatter remains in the water to hinder identification and delay police investigation. The recovery of these remains was a critical point in the investigation, as it solidified the connections between Griffiths and the disappearances of these women. Griffiths had employed various methods to hide his activities, aware that his victims' backgrounds might allow him a level of secrecy. His efforts to cover his tracks extended to altering or disposing of evidence within his apartment and strategically discarding remains in the river. While he had taken steps to obscure his crimes, Griffiths' methods were ultimately ineffective. The forensic evidence found in his apartment and along the riverbanks painted a clear picture of his actions, and his attempts to erase traces of his involvement proved insufficient against the depth of the investigation. The trial of Stephen Griffiths was swift but chilling, marked by moments that deeply affected everyone involved, from the court staff to the families of his victims. Following his arrest and the overwhelming evidence against him, Griffiths was brought before Bradford Crown Court on June 21, 2010. Due to the CCTV footage capturing the murder of Suzanne Blamires, forensic evidence in his apartment, and remains found along the River Aire, Griffiths had little room for defense. He made no attempt to deny his crimes or contest the evidence. Instead, he displayed an unsettling calm and indifference throughout the proceedings. In a shocking moment during one of his initial court appearances, Griffiths introduced himself to the court with a statement that left everyone in the room disturbed. He declared, "I'm the Crossbow Cannibal," fully embracing the dark moniker he had been given by the media. His choice to label himself this way was viewed as a horrifying admission and a display of pride in his actions, rather than any sign of remorse. This statement, along with his detached demeanor, demonstrated his complete lack of empathy for his victims and their families, making it clear that Griffiths felt no regret for the suffering he had caused. The trial did not involve a long, drawn-out defense. Griffiths entered guilty pleas for the murders of Susan Rushworth, Shelley Armitage, and Suzanne Blamires. His admission eliminated the need for a lengthy trial, allowing the judge to proceed directly to sentencing. Griffiths' demeanor remained cold and unfeeling throughout, a display that only deepened the anguish of the victims' families who were present in court to hear the proceedings. Family members of the women he murdered expressed their pain and anger, speaking about the loss they would carry for the rest of their lives. Their statements were filled with grief, offering a painful reminder of the human cost of Griffiths' actions. On June 24, 2010, Griffiths was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge described his crimes as acts of wickedness that shocked not only Bradford but the entire country. The life sentence ensured that Griffiths would spend the rest of his days in prison with no chance of release or appeal. The judge's decision brought a measure of relief to the families, who expressed gratitude that he would never have the opportunity to harm anyone again. The public reaction to Griffiths' sentencing reflected a collective sense of outrage and horror. Media coverage highlighted the shocking nature of his crimes, and the nickname he gave himself became a lasting reminder of the brutality that had shaken Bradford. The case raised concerns about the safety of vulnerable individuals in the community and spurred conversations about support and protection for those who are often overlooked by society. Thanks for watching. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more true crime deep dives. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. See you in the next one.